Let's see. How do I want to address that? For me, this is a bit of transparency and self-disclosure. So for me, I'm not even a year into this new business, right? And so I've been pretty open with folks that I've taken on that I am partially making this up as I go along, right? And so that's part of what I'm feeling into is like, is this person flexible in that way? Because I am adapting procedures and I am being like, man, we haven't been doing this and quick, we need to start doing it, like that kind of thing. So talking about that in the initial conversation and just feeling out their reaction to that, like, does that feel okay to them that this will be ever evolving? And that's worked better with some than with others.
This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Ellie Vargas, a therapist and entrepreneur in the Bay Area in California. Listen as we talk about how and why she started a Center for Immigration Evaluations in addition to her therapy practice. As you hear her story, notice how she grew her skill set and her mindset as she grew her business. Notice also the pivotal decision points in her story. I want you to pay attention to these because we all have them. We face these moments when we see an opportunity to do something bigger or to do something new, and we either take action or we don't. Ellie says in this conversation that she didn't wait until she was ready. I think that's really key because we are never ready to do the next thing. We get ready to do the next thing by doing it. Hi, Ellie. It's good to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Annie. I'm so glad to be here.
So I'm really excited to ask you about a couple of things. And one big one is your business, Bay Area Center for Immigration Evaluations. Mm-hmm. So can you start by just telling us about your journey to creating that business? Because you also have a private practice and you had a private practice before you started it. So how did that happen?
That's right. Yeah. Excuse me. So, I started off with a small private practice and just building that as a therapy practice and got introduced to the idea of immigration evaluations through a colleague who had been doing them for an attorney. She was phasing out of that work and basically, out of the kindness of her heart, kind of passed me her attorney contacts and really just learned. First of all, I was just interested in doing the work. I've always worked in communities where there is a high immigrant population. It's ever since I went to social work school, even before social work school, I was working with those communities. So it's always been a passion of mine. And so I loved this idea of being able to provide services in this way. I was really lucky to connect with some immigration attorneys who were very patient with me and really trained me and were very generous with their time. And so slowly just started learning what it is that, first of all, needs to go into these evaluations, what the attorneys are hoping will be covered, how to format them, what some of the legalese is. But really at its core, it's a thorough psychosocial evaluation, which I already knew how to do. And so I just started picking them up here and there. It started very slowly. I mean, at the beginning, it was maybe like 3 or 4 or 5 a year I was doing. And then I went on maternity leave. I had my second kid and was out for several months. And thinking about coming back to practice, knowing that it was going to take some time to kind of ramp back up to full speed. There was some lapse in, I had lost some clients over that time who had transitioned on or we had kind of terminated. And so I decided to do a more active outreach to immigration attorneys in the area. My thinking was, while I'm ramping back up my clinical practice, this is a way that I can pretty quickly generate referrals. They come in one time, I write a report, price it so that it's, makes sense for the time that I would spend, and plug in those holes in my schedule, create extra income while I am short, essentially, having been out of practice for the months that I had taken off. So that's really how it started ramping up a little bit more for me. And I started thinking about it more as far as how to fit it into a business model that would make sense.
So it was kind of like, it was just fitting into the business you already had at that point.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of felt like, it was something I really liked to do. At this point, I was thinking both, hey, this is it's kind of a win-win, right? So I'm low in my clinical weekly census. I've got extra time. I could use the extra money. I just did like a big push to just get my name out there, the month before I knew I was going to be coming back from maternity leave. And that's kind of how it started to become more of a fixture in my practice. And that just continued, right? So it just kept picking up. I started, doing more and more outreach, realizing that attorneys really were hungry for, good clinical practitioners to refer their clients to. And so, fast forward a couple of years, I'm doing, I go from doing 2, 3, 4 a year to 2, 3, 4, 5 a month. Pretty soon, I don't have enough time to accommodate all the referrals. And that's how the thinking of transitioning into a new business began to evolve.
How do you think that happened, that snowballing? Was it like referrals from other attorneys?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of things. I was doing some marketing, right? So I was cold calling and cold reaching out to local attorneys in the area. I think attorneys talk, right? And so an attorney might call and say, hey, who are you using, right? And they might share those resources. And then I also think it was a culmination of, the 2016 election season and election and the fervor around all of that, and many more applications for, many more immigrants maybe who had been putting off applying to change their status. The attorneys that I spoke to just said around that time, they were just flooded with work. And so there was a lot of work. There was a ton of demand.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so then you got to this point where it was just taking up a lot, and there wasn't really a way for you to do all the evaluations yourself and keep your practice going.
That's right. It was either I start sending these referrals on to other people, or I find a way to increase my capacity so that I can not lose these relationships with the attorneys that I've worked so hard to build.
So what did you do?
Well, I started thinking crazy. I started thinking that I could actually make a second business, something that I have never done before. And, just kind of started floating the idea out there, thinking about what this would look like. I think my first step was reaching out to some other colleagues that I knew in the area who did this work. And, for a good reason, they were like, well, I've got my own thing. Why would I come work for you? Right. And so realizing that really what I was looking to do, the business model that I came up with that I thought made the most sense was to find clinicians who had the motivation, had the interest, but maybe didn't have the experience. Right. And so it's kind of like a training institute where, I found clinicians, like I said, who wanted to learn, but didn't, know where to go to take it, wanted the mentoring and the feedback in it, and gave them some initial training and gave them referrals. And in exchange for a lower fee than so the client pays the business, the clinician gets paid a portion of that, and the portion that I stay with goes to support their kind of ongoing mentorship and training in this, as well as the marketing for the business and the overhead. Eventually, I hired a scheduler, so now I've got a virtual assistant who takes all the incoming calls. We work in simple practice, so she has access to the availability that the clinicians provide to us, schedules based on geography most of the time. So I've got clinicians all over the Bay Area right now. And so, so it grew from 1 clinician to 2 clinicians to 3 clinicians. And I had, at one point, the most I had was 7 clinicians from Sacramento to Solano County to Marin to San Francisco, Alameda, down in San Jose. So just trying to blanket the Bay Area.
Because these evaluations, they happen in person, right?
They happen in person. Yeah. What I really liked about the idea of this business model, and it's similar to the way it really worked for me. So these are clinicians who have their own private practice, who are looking to diversify, add an income stream. And what I like about it is, we've all got these pockets in our schedule that are hard to book, right? Whether it's like mid-afternoon or whatever. And so they just give me their pockets, right? And it's a win-win. Because these clients, they come in one time for a couple of hours, even if it's in the middle of the day, even if they have to take a day off work, it's not a big deal. It's one time. And the clinicians get to plug up holes in their schedules that otherwise would go, as an unproductive time.
Into Facebook.
That's right. Facebook or Instagram.
Yes. Yeah, that's really cool. And I remember when we talked about this, when it was not a business yet, when it was just something you were doing on your own, that, it was partly that you wanted to fill in holes in your schedule, but it was partly like you were like, I just don't want to give up this work. This is really important to me and rewarding.
Absolutely. And that's what I said when I started out. Like my first attraction to it was it does just feel so important. And there is that kind of, what I came to realize is that it just feels like such a win-win. You get to plug up holes in your schedule. You get a diversified stream of income, which for me brings me, I don't know what the word is, brings me confidence. I don't know if that's the right word, but since I've transitioned to full-time private practice and self-employed, I like live in terror of the next recession, right? So, what that will mean. And I think there's a reality to that. And there's something really reassuring. I think that's a better word, reassuring to me that I've got this other stream of income coming in.
So it's reassurance and it's confidence and it's like a feeling of, like, does it feel like it gives you a feeling of ease rather than having to feel that scarcity?
Yeah. I'll give you a good example. This just happened a couple of weeks ago. So I had a private pay client that I've been working with for years and years, pays my full fee, really reliable, always comes, and was ready for termination, right? And it makes it so easy for me to just say, you are ready, and to be able to end and then just kind of have in the back of my head, I just pick up an extra evaluation until I find that next client, right? It helps with combating the scarcity fear. Because it's real easy for me. I've got a really steady flow of referrals at this point to just pick up an extra evaluation. And that pretty much takes care of a lost client.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And so it's win-win-win because it's good for your clients that you can fully embrace them leaving when they need to leave.
That's right.
It's great for you. It's great for the people who you're evaluating.
Yeah. And I will say, and I think there's been a timeliness to this business also, given the political climate around immigration. And I think it's one of the things that as I've talked to clinicians interested in doing this work for me, that really is motivating them. It's like, what can we do? Right? Like, there's so much awful. What can we do? And it really is a way that we can use our training and use our skills and I want to be really careful here. And I say this to my clinicians, and for sure it's a value that I hold. First and foremost, we have to be ethical and we have to use our clinical skills in a stick to them. So we're not writing things that are not true, and we're not reporting things that are not true. But it is a way to support immigrants who are in the process of getting their legal status in this country, in a very important way to them. These psychological evaluations are really important pieces of evidence in their cases. And this is how I think about it, while I'm not going to fudge anything, right? I'm going to absolutely be as 100% as ethical and stick to my, not invent diagnoses or anything of that sort. For me, the step that I've taken that feels more like a social action step is pricing them for sure where I'm being compensated for my time, but also that just feels like I can stomach looking somebody in the eye and saying, this is how much I'm charging you for this evaluation. I know there are clinicians out there who charge well over $1,000 and more for these evaluations. It's felt very important to me to price them in a way that still feels in line with, or how should I say this? That feels like this is the piece that I can give, is, not charging at the top of the scale, but charging in a way that I feel good enough about. And I feel like I said, like if I lose a weekly client, therapy client, and I pick up an evaluation or maybe an evaluation and a half extra, it covers it. But yeah, my value around this has not been to inflate the cost of it or overinflate the cost of it. That I just have to be able to like stomach how much I'm charging these individuals and families for these evaluations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you found a way to make it work in your business model also by you not being the only one doing them.
That's right.
That's wonderful. Mm-hmm. What do you keep in mind when you're hiring someone? Like, first of all, how do you know when it's time to hire someone? And then also, how do you find the right person?
Yeah, that's been a learning curve for me.
I think it always is. Like whenever someone is running a center or hiring additional clinicians, that, I don't know about you, Ellie, but that tends to be one of the trickiest parts.
Yeah. Yeah. And it took me a while to figure out, trial and error, who the right person is. So what I did come to learn, so lots of people were interested who, for example, were maybe still in an agency job and were starting a private practice on the weekend or in the evening or something like that. And it became very clear very quickly that, at least because I also had a minimum expectation, right? So if you're going to come on with me and I'm going to take on the overhead of another clinician, my expectation is that you provide enough availability to take on 3 evaluations a month, which helps me cover my overhead. So that was just too hard for people who were still holding a full-time or mostly full-time agency job and trying to build a private practice and taking on these evaluations, because it's the time of the evaluation, but then you also have to find time to write the report, right? So that was something that I learned pretty early on. I think it's a great fit. What I've learned is that it's a great fit for folks that are in private practice, primarily in private practice. Their private practice is not full, right? So they have pockets that they want to fill. And folks that like to write. That's a really important part of this. So there's the clinical evaluation that you do with the client, but then it's, it's a couple hours of writing, of synthesizing it and putting it into a professional report that's going to be used as a piece of evidence in a court of law. So people who know how to write or who like writing and have a good sense of their writing. And, at least so far, I have only hired folks that are bilingual English and Spanish, just because in this area, in the Bay Area, there's just, that's the highest demand. I will say I've developed relationships with several law firms who specialize in non-Spanish speaking populations, who either the clients speak English well enough and or we work through translation. So I don't think Spanish is a must to do these evaluations, but then your market is going to just have to focus on, because I don't think a Spanish speaking client, there's plenty of clinicians who speak Spanish and they'll want somebody in their first language, but a non-Spanish speaking immigration client, I think there's a market there too, even if a clinician doesn't speak a second language. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And did you notice in interviewing people outside of just their skills and their right fitness in terms of their time and availability, did you notice anything about like what you were looking for in terms of values or in terms of like what it was like to interact with them?
Yeah. Let's see. How do I want to address that? For me, this is a bit of transparency and self-disclosure. So for me, I'm not even a year into this new business, right? And so I've been pretty open with folks that I've taken on that I am partially making this up as I go along, right? And so that's part of what I'm feeling into is like, is this person flexible in that way? Because I am adapting procedures and I am being like, man, we haven't been doing this and quick, we need to start doing it, like that kind of thing. So talking about that in the initial conversation and just feeling out their reaction to that, like, does that feel okay to them that this will be ever evolving? And that's worked better with some than with others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes so much sense. It's a startup. It's like you're creating it as you go. And I love that idea of making that explicit instead of trying to pretend like I've got it all figured out and then suddenly being exposed as like something doesn't work. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I definitely didn't have my stuff together at all enough to even pretend like I did. So it felt really important to just put it out there and say, like, this is an ongoing evolution. And it's been helpful in that way to be in touch with the clinicians as they're kind of like, going through the processes and procedures, and there's a loop, and I'm constantly asking for feedback of like, how could this be better? What's missing? What do you wish you had known from the beginning that I neglected to state clearly? Or, it really has felt collaborative in that way, which has been nice.
And I'm just thinking, like, you have done just a shit ton of work in the last year to get this thing off the ground. Like, what surprised you about the kind of work that it took? And what did you think what have you realized that you learned about running a business in the last year?
It has been a lot of work. I mean, I think I'm such a geek, and I think it's partly the way that I regulate myself is getting into spreadsheets, right? So it's like it's like the polar opposite of like trauma-based work, right? It's like numbers and checking boxes, and I'm such a geek. I love that stuff, and it really feels like an escape for me. So that aspect of it has been a lot of work, but I feel really confident. I feel like I set up really, really good systems for this business. But it did take time. It's interesting. I have learnred that although I like being in relationship and I do like the feedback loops with the clinicians, I'm not particularly liking managing. And there are some clinicians that require more of that than others. But that's something that I've learned that I didn't know. And so that's, it's been a good thing to learn. And it's part of the gig. So I feel like I lost a piece of your question in there.
No, you didn't. This is really interesting.
Okay. But it's part of, and I don't know if this is a good point to segue, but it's part of, as I'm thinking about how to evolve this business, it's part, that aspect of it is part of what's making me think about kind of the next iteration or the next evolution of what this can be.
Ooh, I like that. Because it also makes me think of superpowers. And that you're like, as you create something new, then you run into the parts of it that are using your superpowers and the parts that aren't. And I think we can tell because we love it or we feel like it's draining us. And like, so even when you were talking about spreadsheets and all of these systems you created, it's like those things are using parts of your superpowers that you don't necessarily get to use as much in your other work, in your clinical work. So that's really cool. And I've had a similar experience, like in as an entrepreneur, getting to use those parts of myself, but then getting into the management piece, you're noticing some parts of it that don't necessarily light you up. And then you get to adjust your business from there.
Yeah, exactly.
And what has been like in expanding, in bringing on new people and in increasing your reach and, so dramatically growing that business, were there any skills or tools that surprised you that you needed to use more? Or did you kind of do it the same way? Like, was the outreach similar to what it was when it was just you?
It was much more strategic, but similar, right? Just a little more refined and a little more strategic. I think, part of it is that's the question that I think I missed. So how to know when to bring on a new clinician, right? So that's been like, kind of trusting the process and, whether to kind of feel into like, we're okay, here we are. I brought in, I now have 3 clinicians. We're kind of busting at the seams. We're scheduling 4 to 6 weeks out. Now seems like a good time. But also strategically saying like, okay, I'm about to do this big marketing push in this part of the Bay Area, specifically where I know there's already so much demand. So in anticipation of that, and with a bit of a leap of faith, I'm going to bring on, an extra clinician strategically in this area. And so trusting, that a marketing push is going to work. But what was nice is I felt like there was always this kind of escape hatch where I'm working within the Bay Area. So even if, let's say I bring a clinician on down in San Jose, where I know there's a ton of demand for this work, but it may take a minute. It's not a big ask. If somebody in Oakland calls and we're scheduling 6 weeks out to say, but we've got something in 2 weeks in San Jose, that's not a big ask to have them drive down there. So trusting also that like the business model can adjust or can fill itself out in the meantime.
Nice. Yeah. So what have you ever had in running this new business, a low or scary moment? And if you did, like how'd you get through it?
Yeah. So I remember I had brought on, I think my first 2 clinicians, early in 2018, and we were rolling, right? I mean, like they were getting up to speed and everything was feeling like smooth. And I was kind of in that pocket of like, do I bring on more clinicians? And they both quit. Like maybe the same day, and that might be an exaggeration in my mind. It felt like within the same hour. One decided that they had, their family had to move out of the area, and the other one, the other one had gotten this great job offer that they didn't anticipate, and now was going to be employed full time. So, nothing specifically related to the work, but it was like, I've been like working, getting all these referrals, and now I got to start all over again, and I remember, I do a mastermind with a colleague of mine, just being like, I don't know who I thought I was, thinking that this was going to work, or, there has been that turnover, and that's frustrating. And another kind of piece of trying to be like, God, is this business model, like, is there something wrong with it? Or is this just what it is, right? That people kind of try something out and it either works for them or it doesn't, or their life evolves into something else. But that's been challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how do you think you get through that part?
Well, honestly, I think part of what pushes me is just feeling some accountability to the attorneys, law firms, and immigration clients that, there's some feeling of not wanting to let them down, right? Like I've developed this trust. I've developed this brand. I'm kind of out there now, where I feel like, without that, I might be like, oh, all right, let me just take a month or 2 to just not push so hard on this. But I mean, when those calls are coming in and, the attorneys are saying, look, this is who I really think you should go talk to. I really trust these people. You don't want to let them down. And so that just gives me a little hustle to be like, all right, let me see who I can find. Let me, put the call out and see if anybody knows anybody, or, put out an Indeed ad to find some clinicians who might want to pick up some work like this.
So you just get back up on the horse.
Yeah, I feel like I really do feel motivated by the trust that has been put in me and the relationships that I've built with these attorneys.
Ellie, I feel like you're going to have to come back in the future to talk about your therapy practice, but given that we don't have time to do that, how do you split your time roughly between your therapy practice and this business, including the management, including all of it?
Yeah, it's probably about 50-50. And I am probably working more than I should be working, meaning I'm often, doing stuff in the evenings after the kids go to bed. I see about 10 or 11, maybe 12 clients a week. And then this is what I do with the rest of my time. And I'm not doing as many of the evaluations myself anymore in this other business. So it's a lot more of the kind of admin, marketing, and relationship building, and then kind of the mentoring of the clinicians doing the work.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could time travel to the start of your business, and the Ellie of that time is going to ask you for advice, and she says, I want to know something concrete that I should do or know, and then also like a more big picture piece of advice, what would you tell her?
I think the big picture pieces are along the lines of, it's okay to not know. You don't have to have it all figured out before you start. It's okay to just start and learn as you go, and trust that, especially in the therapy practice, that like seeds that you're planting as far as creating relationships and networking, that even if you don't see the results of those right away, that they do come to fruition and pay off. And then I think as far as like a concrete thing, I wasn't doing great like big picture planning at the beginning, like things like making sure that I was planning to have enough money to take time off. And, I was just kind of like paying myself what I earned without realizing that I might want to take some time off someday, and would need to have some money put to the side for that. So I think that would be my advice, to just kind of keep the bigger picture and all the things that you need for yourself in this life in the business model. So you had to see about how to work that in.
Yeah. And that's, when you come back at some point, that's something I want to talk to you about, is this whole adventure you and I are both on of using the profit first system in our businesses, because that's just such a beautiful way that we get to set aside money for those different things.
Absolutely. It's been a life changer.
Yeah. So, what is the best place for therapists to find you and throw compliments at you, Ellie?
Sure. So since we talked mostly about the immigration evaluation business today, I'm going to direct folks to that website. And so it's the acronym. It's the Bay Area Center for Immigration Evaluation. So the website is BACIE.org. And if you go to that, bacie.org/rebel, I will have some freebies on there specifically for folks who might be interested in integrating immigration evaluations into their practice. I alluded to a next iteration of this business, and something in the works that I am developing is going to be a national directory of mental health clinicians who are doing immigration evaluations, so that attorneys have a one-stop shop to find folks in their area who do these. And so at that website, you can sign up to be informed when the beta version is going to be launched, and to get in at the ground floor and be able to integrate this work into your practice and have an easy marketing tool to get yourself in front of immigration attorneys.
Beautiful. So particularly for the listeners, it's BACIE.org/rebel. Beautiful. Thank you, Ellie. It's so wonderful to talk to you.
It's good to be here with you, Annie. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Ellie just walked us through her experience taking her gifts beyond the therapy room, making a much bigger impact, and increasing her income in a way that her one-on-one sessions just can't. And as you could hear, it is an incredible, rewarding, and challenging process. I think the way I put it was, you've done a shit ton of work in the last year. If you're getting ready to challenge the status quo and take your work beyond the therapy room, you already know that the process can be overwhelming. Many therapists get stuck in that overwhelm and don't make it happen. Some therapists dip their toes in and then give up because the first thing they try doesn't take off. And this is so understandable. You really need a lot of relentlessness to go beyond what's expected and build something new. And you really need a structure and support. I've designed a program for you called Rebel Therapist Mastermind, and it guides you through the whole process. We help you identify what your new offer is going to be, whether it's going to be a therapy center, a book, a podcast, an online course, a workshop, group therapy, or something else. Then we go through the entire process of creating and testing your idea, adjusting it along the way, creating your bold and unique messaging that's really going to stand out, and delivering it to your people. It's broken down into 3 stages. So in stage 1, you fill out an extensive questionnaire to get clear on where you are now, what you want your vision to accomplish for you, what you already know, and what you need to learn, and a lot more stuff. Then in stage 2, you and the other Rebel Therapist participants meet with me for 3 6-hour days to do the work. So you get a lot done in real time over those 3 days. We lean into your vision, identify and refine your offer, and work on your bold messaging and your marketing plan. And then in stage 3, you meet with me and the other participants every month for the next 8 months. So you'll be doing the work, getting feedback between the sessions, and staying on track along the way. It's a 9-month program because even after those 3 days of solid work, you're going to need to keep working on this to really make it happen. Learn more about Rebel Therapist Mastermind and apply at rebeltherapist.me/mastermind. We're taking applications until January 31st, and the 3-day intensive happens in February of 2019. I will see you next week.